to thank Andrew for the effort he took in this project. I remember like a year ago, even more, he called me and said, I have this project, what do I do? Try to work something together, and by the lectures, the presentations we had with Father Andrew yesterday from the seminarians, I think it was a great success. And the presentations we had were really, really good, and I learned quite a bit from them. Good, so my question today is how to avoid making God a course among courses, and I think this is important because when we speak about how God acts, how can we say that God acts in the world, one must be careful, because God is not something like created things are, right? And if we start talking too quickly, sometimes to do that, we may speak of God as a course among courses. And I'll say why this is not the best thing to do. All right, I have this written because if not, I will speak by far too long, and I will have understanding here rather than sitting there. So one of the great difficulties that in the contemporary debate on divine action faces is the fact that in many proposals, God is taken to be a cause as another existing cause in the universe. This can be easily seen in the writings of non-philosophical scholars who oppose any theory of divine action, such as Richard Dawkins or Dan Dennett. Dan Dennett is a philosopher, but not of my kind. Anyway, but it can also appear in the works of authors more prone to describing, or at least attempt at describing, how God can be said to act in the universe. I'm not going to refer to those from the atheist camp today, but rather I suggest devoting our time to analyzing why we should try to avoid such proposals and how one can do so. The basic problem with suggesting even implicitly that God acts in the universe as another cause is simply that God loses his transcendence, his divinity. I will analyze some unexamined assumptions in the debate as a whole. In particular, the identification of causality and determinism, and the opposition between divine and natural causation. This analysis will show that the debate lowers God's transcendent status to a status of a cause among causes, and hence diminishes God's omnipotence to acting within a certain set of particular places and times. Now, the original goal of the Divine Action Project was to explain how God can act providentially within nature in ways that would help the development of the history of the world and human affairs in the directions that God wants, but without disrupting the created order. That is, without intervening or breaking the laws of nature. So that's the cover of the 6th volume of like a 15-20-year project, or even longer, which was called the Special Divine Action Project, Scientific Perspectives on Divine Action. Robert Russell led it, and as you can see, well, I don't know if you can see, but each volume of those 5 refer to one conference in quantum mechanics, neuroscience, molecular and evolutionary biology, chaos and complexity, and cosmology. Right? And it gathered hundreds of scholars. All right, so the basic leading principle that guided this project was the search for scientific theories that were amenable to discourses on divine providence and action by offering some kind of ontological indeterminism. If Christian theology is right in affirming that God guides the universe in ways that go beyond creation and conservation, that is, God acts here and there, then God should do so in a non-intrusive way. That is, God should not break the laws of nature. That's what these people think. Hence, the universe must offer some kind of ontological causal gap within which God could perform these actions. Now, Robert Russell and Thomas Tracy, another one of these scholars, explore the possibility of finding this joint at which God's causality would interact with natural causes in the indeterminism of quantum mechanics, suggesting that divine providential action could be performed through quantum events, I will look into that into detail in a bit. But there are others. John Polkinghorne argued for divine action through the input of information in chaotic systems, for instance. Arthur Peacock suggested models of top-down causation. Philip Clayton held theories of emergence could be regarded as viable paths to thinking new models of divine action. Nancy Murphy, with George Ellis, proposed a model for divine action in the human brain, and so forth and so forth. There were many, many proposals. But the basic idea of all this is that nature offers, at least at some level, indeterminacy, openness, potentiality, contingency that is available for God to act in those little gaps. Now, in these models, then, God would act directly to determine what is left underdetermined within the order of nature, choosing which outcome offered by the underdetermination of nature to bring about. And again, because there's a gap, there is no breaking of any laws of nature. Now, in this proposal, God makes use of, so I will look into the quantum mechanics proposal, right? In this proposal, God makes use of quantum indeterminacy to work his providence in the created universe. Now, similar critiques to those I will offer could also be posed to the other strategies, the chaos system proposal, the brain proposal, the emergence proposal, but I will only look at this one today, because if not, I will have to speak for the whole conference, and that's not what we all do. Now, quantum theory studies the smallest subatomic particles out of which natural things are made. And it seems to provide an indeterministic account of nature, account that many theologians found attractive. If nature is not deterministic, if events are not predetermined in their courses, it is plausible to think that there are causal ontological gaps in nature. These scholars think that God could act in those gaps. Now, Robert Russell, one of these reference, has actively contributed to this debate, introducing at a very, very early stage the acronym NIODA, that is, non-interventionist objective divine action, to express the notion, this notion that divine action should be understood as non-interventionist, that is, not breaking any law, objective, that is, not subjective, not that I feel that God acts, but rather that we can find a place where we can objectively say that God acts. Non-intervention, objective, divine action, those two. Now, for Russell, if quantum mechanics shows that nature is open, then there is a case for God's providential action. As Russell puts it, the world of natural processes is causally incomplete. Now, the laws of science that science discovers, at least at the quantum level, suggest that nature is open for novelty. There might be what could be called natural ontological gaps. Now, so the basic claim is that the total set of natural conditions affecting a process, that is, the total set of conditions that science can discover, is necessary but insufficient to determine the precise outcome of the process. Now, Russell's argument is simple and clear. God acts together with nature to bring about quantum events. Nature provides the necessary causes, but God's action together with nature constitutes the sufficient cause for the occurrence of the event. Without God, then there would not be quantum events. God then can be understood theologically as acting purposefully within the ongoing natural processes without disrupting them or violating the laws of nature. Now, God's special action results in specific, objective consequences in nature, which could not have resulted without God's special action. Now, for Russell, science would not be expected to include anything about God's action in nature as part of its scientific explanation of the world, because this providential action would be hidden within the statistical and probabilistic laws of quantum mechanics. Ultimately, where science employs quantum mechanics and philosophy points to ontological indeterminism, Russell's theology sees God acting within nature to create the future. The results of God's action at the quantum level can be seen as bringing about, in a non-interventionist mode, both many of the general futures of the world we describe theologically in terms of general providence, and at least some of those specific events in the world to which the theology of special providence refers. This is a quote, right? God then fulfills what nature offers, providentially bringing into being the future, acting specifically in all events, moment by moment. Now, anyone could expect these proposals, and this one in particular, raise several objections. Among the most prominent are those presented by Bill Sturger, Michael Dodds, and William Carroll, all of whom are Aquinas scholars like I try to be, who find the divine action debate, and particularly models assuming quantum theory, to allow for God's special providence to render God's activity as another natural course. Now, even if it's true that no of these participants intend to do so, concerns remain over whether they have succeeded in giving an account of God's action different from a created cause. In fact, Russell's proposal is not meant to describe God's action as equivalent to any other natural agent acting in nature, since by hypothesis, for him, the set of natural causes is insufficient to bring the events. Now, God's action remains hidden within nature's structure for Russell, and it will take the form of realizing one of several potentials in the quantum system. Now, God's direct action is hidden in principle for science, Russell says. Still, I find it that this problem is like the crux of the whole debate. In the end, if it is not possible to consider God to be a radically different cause from natural causes, God would simply stop being the transcendent God, an omnipotent creator of Christian theology. Now, the very basic problem, two at least, is the identification of causation with determination. And I start here my critique of this proposal. So, if causation identifies with determination, everything that is indeterministic is without a cause. Now, the second problem to which I will refer in a bit is that it is assumed that were God able to act in the universe whenever and wherever God wanted, the autonomy of nature in its action would be endangered, and with it, the foundations of science. That is, God cannot intervene in nature because his intervention would mean that nature is not fully autonomous in its operations. From these two assumptions, the theological conclusion that follows is simple. God has to act in nature as another cause in nature. If these assumptions are accepted, contemporary models of providential divine action in the world can only conclude that God must be conceived as another cause among causes, leading to an impoverished conception of God who is ultimately bound by the laws of nature. So God, the creator who created the laws of nature, ends up being bound by those very laws that he created. Now, the first philosophical assumption has to do with the relation between cause and effect, which is understood, as I think, to be deterministic. The effect cannot be something different from what it is, given that the cause is required to cause what it is meant to cause. If one looks at how Nyoda proponents understand causes to relate to their effect, one finds that a cause is that which determines the outcome of the development of a physical system. In this scenario, there can be no effect without a determining cause, since the effect cannot be something different. The cause deterministically causes what it is meant to cause. Thus, an effect that happens indeterministically such as a quantum collapse or a genetic mutation, is simply not cause, or at least not fully cause, because it's not determined by its preceding cause. Right? That's a bit too many times I said the word cause. I hope you follow. Now they need to find, again, a cause to fulfill that insufficiency of nature. The key here is that in these events there are no indeterministic causes. There is rather a lack of natural causality that allows the quantum system to be indeterministic. Let's read Russell again. In iota, its hypothesis is attending to events where nature does not have sufficient causality to produce the outcome that actually do occur. Explaining quantum events as indeterministic events in these terms means introducing a break in the ontological causal chain in nature. There is no cause in these deterministic processes at the subatomic level of nature. Thus, future events are not cause. Even if Russell affirms that the dilemma of providential divine action is broken given the indeterministic character of the universe posed by science, the notion of causality assumed remains a deterministic notion. Causality is identified with determinism. Now, even if indeterminism of quantum mechanics seems to offer him and other scholars a solution to the dilemma of divine action, the notions of causes and effect used in the debate remain deterministic. I will bring down the conclusion later on. Now, the second and examined assumption of this debate is that if God is able to act providentially whenever and wherever God wants, then the autonomy of nature is endangered. Contemporary theologians appear to argue that any appeal to divine providential involvement in the world would go against the power of nature. There is a fundamental incompatibility between the view of God's providential action in the universe as the ongoing cause of all that is, and the view that there are autonomous natural processes. Given the deterministic notion of causality, many today accept that to defend the autonomy of nature and the existence of real causal connections, it is necessary to restrict God's causal power to certain places and times. So it seems urgent for them to find ways to account for God's providential activity in the world. Now, the only way in which God could do something within the natural realm is that there would be a situation within the universe that would have no natural cause. A place where nature does nothing. In these situations, then, there would be no autonomous natural cause, and there we can place God. Now, it seems that God is competing against nature and hence against science's descriptions of nature, as many new atheists like to put it. It is the deterministic notion of causality used in the debate that makes participants then assume that God's causality is opposed to natural autonomy. Now, these two unexamined assumptions, namely that causation is deterministic and that God's power is opposed to natural powers, lead to what I believe is the unavoidable conclusion that God has to be conceived as acting as another cause among causes. Now, I've been asked many times, so what? Why is it so important? Why is this not a good theological move? Well, simply put, God should not be placed at the level of created causes, because doing so would mean denying or diminishing God's transcendence, God's omnipotence, God's omniscience, but God would lose all God's attributes, meaning that God would stop being God. As I tell some of my undergraduate students, I would not like to pray to that God, basically. Now, for many contemporary scholars, God is bound by the laws of nature, which in the end construe God as acting according to them. Hence, God is conceived as acting according to the laws of nature. Now, these rules These, the laws of nature, rule the way natural causes work, and hence would rule how God causes within nature. For Russell, God is limited to act within the laws that govern the development of quantum systems. Russell will argue that since the interpreted theory tells us that there is no natural cause, that causes a quantum event, God cannot be conceived as a natural cause, because the scientific theory says there are no natural causes. Now, it seems that if one wants to hold that God could act within the created universe, the autonomy of nature would be put into question. One must hold then a reduced natural causal autonomy, because one would be assuming a fundamental incompatibility between God acting in the created universe and the universe having autonomous natural causal processes. Now, the question is, what is the problem with God acting as a cause among causes? As I mentioned before, this is a problematic position because it involves issues concerning the very nature of God. It seems that the traditional notion of God of classical theism, which was to a certain extent that which the debate started, is completely changed into a rather different notion. So, is there a way to avoid making God a cause among causes within the contemporary debate? I believe there is, and one can find it in the writings of those who are inspired by the thought of Thomas Aquinas. As many of you would know, for Aquinas, the distinction between primary and secondary causation was key to understanding how one could say that God is active in the created universe. Without getting into too much detail on this distinction and his full doctrine of divine providence, I will offer a few key notions as to close off this presentation. Aquinas' metaphysics of being is the very foundation to understanding his views on how one can say that God is at work in the natural world. So he teaches that the relation between natural beings and God should be described with the notion of participation of existence. What has existence by its own essence and thus is its own existence, namely God, can give it to other beings, that is, can participate it to other beings, which means that other beings depend on God. Oh, that's the problem. Sorry. Okay. So the idea of dependence of creatures on God is what Aquinas understands as the basis for his doctrine of creation ex nihilo, which he explains as God's causing the complete existence of beings that constitute the universe by participating into God's being. The very fact that God creates the world means that it is completely dependent upon God. That is, that there is nothing that does not have its source in God. Aquinas describes this dependence in causal terms by explaining that God is the cause of the whole universe, in the sense that God directly and immediately causes the universe. Everything that exists because of God's direct action of creation. Now Aquinas goes even further and claims that this complete dependence upon its creator of all created things refers not only to their being, but also to their actions. This idea is the key to understanding how God could be said to be active within the created universe. That is, how God could be said to be provident, and not another cause among causes. The basic argument runs as follows. For created beings to have powers to act, that power should also be created and hence also dependent upon God. Then, given that creatures are kept in existence through their participation in divine being, creatures are also said to have powers to act as long as God participates them their power to act. It is in his analysis of creation as the complete dependence of creatures upon God that Aquinas introduces the difference between primary and secondary causality. God is the primary cause of things because God causes their very existence, without which things would not be. Hence, The secondary causes cannot do anything if it is not by way of the primary cause causing it to exist. There are several features that differentiate these two kinds of causing. First, for Aquinas, the primary cause is more influential in the effect of the secondary cause than the secondary cause itself. Given that all that what the secondary cause is caused by the primary cause, then its power to be a cause and to produce something is given by the primary cause. So even if the secondary cause is the real cause of its effect, properly speaking, the primary cause is primarily the cause of the effect of the secondary cause. Second, since the secondary cause does not cause except by participating in the power of the primary cause, the effect does not proceed from the power of the secondary cause except because of the power of the primary cause. Now these considerations open the path to understanding the ways in which God can be said to act providentially in the universe. Aquinas argues for 4 different ways in which God causally penetrates most intimately the causality of created natural things, and hence can be said to be providential. First, something can be understood as giving something else the power to act, as in the divine act of creation. Since all power of any created efficient cause whatsoever is from God, then God is said to cause every action of created causes because he gives natural things those powers. Second, God may be said to be the cause of an action by upholding the created natural power in its being, as in the constant participation of God's being in the creature. Every action that cannot continue after the influence of a certain efficient cause belongs to that efficient cause, as a remedy that preserves sight is said to make a man see. Now God not only gave existence to things, but preserves them in existence. That God is always preserving those powers and hence causing them to be. Now I have called these 2 the foundational moments, because they are like founding moments of God's action, creation and preservation. The other 2 I termed the dynamic moments. Now the explanation of these dynamic moments depends on how Aquinas understands the workings of an instrumental cause, as he uses this analogy to explain it. For Aquinas, an instrument, say a pen, when being used as an instrument, has 2 different effects. One that pertains to it according to its own nature, and another that pertains to it insofar as it is being used by the primary cause. So it's in the artificial nature of the pen to put ink onto the paper, but it's only that first effect can only be done through me doing it, right? Because the pen does not have the power to put the ink on the paper. But also making sense, making something meaningful, like writing my name or my daughter's name onto the paper it's an effect reached only by the power of the primary cause, that is myself, right? The pen by itself cannot write anything meaningful, can only put ink on the paper. Good. So every natural cause or power of a thing finds its ultimate cause in God's causality in this second sense as well. So the dynamic moment, I'll come back. So neither effect could be caused by the instrument, if not by depending on the causing of the principal cause. Thus both effects belong to the instrument and to the principal cause. These 2 effects refer to each of the 2 dynamic moments that I will now present. The first of these ways of causing refers to the first effect of an instrument. Every created cause performs its operation according to its own nature and powers, moved by God to act, and to achieve its proper effect. For instance, when someone uses the sharpness of a knife to cut a loaf of bread to make toast. The first effect would be the very cutting of the knife. Now the second way of causing the action of the instrument refers to producing an effect that goes beyond the power of a particular creative cause. In the example I've just read, the second effect would be cutting the loaf of bread in a particular shape, which is something that the knife bites out cannot perform, like in the shape of a star, because my daughter likes toast in the shape of stars. Ultimately, these two dynamic moments are possible given the immanence of the universal power of God, the primary cause, in secondary causes. Now, for Aquinas, the cause of an action is that by whose power is performed, more even than that which does it, even as the principal efficient cause in comparison to the instrument is more the cause. Thus, even if a created cause is immediate to its effect when considered in itself, if one considers the power by which the action is done, then the power of the primary cause is more immediate to the effect, as I said just a while ago. Now, therefore, God is more the cause of every action than the secondary causes. Still, for Aquinas, the causal powers of created things are sufficient for causing on their own created order, yet dependent on the divine power to cause. God and natural efficient causes cause on two different levels. The same effect is ascribed to a created cause and to God, not in the sense that God causes one part, that God complements the insufficiency of the created cause, like in Russell's model. Rather, the totality of the effect proceeds from each in different ways, just like the whole effect is said to proceed from the instrument and from the principal cause. It is in this respect, in the joint causing of the two orders of primary and secondary causality, that the created powers are not enough to cause their own effects, and that they depend on God. Now, so God gives created things the power to cause. Aquinas argues, however, that this natural causing of secondary causes is in a sense also necessary, because even though God could cause the effect without the created cause, he wishes to cause by means of nature, in order to preserve the order of things. I could not write my daughter's name with a piece of wood, for instance. I would have to do something to the piece of wood to write my daughter's name. That's what he means by that. Or I could not cut the loaf of bread into the shape of a star with a pen or a pencil, because it just doesn't have the actual powers to do so. It would take me quite a while, and she would starve. Anyway, sorry. She's 6, so not very patient at that age. Now, in these 4 ways that I just explained, God is said to be the cause of the causing of every created cause, inasmuch as everything participates and depends on his power to be a cause. Therefore, God is the cause of everything's action, inasmuch as he gives everything the power to act and preserves that power in being, while applying those powers to action, and inasmuch as by his power every power acts. Now, in acting in these ways, God is not considered to be a cause among causes, because his action is fully different and at a complete different level than those of creatures. And I hope I have shown you how one can avoid making God a cause.